I want to thank you very much again, Secretary Pompeo. And as we said earlier this evening, the efforts of yourself, the President, and the rest of the administration has certainly made America stronger and made Israel stronger. And we just really, we all applauded and commended. So thank you very much. I want to just thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I want to ask the first question about Iran. As you mentioned, the administration, to their credit, is you're imposing the toughest sanctions, reimposing the sanctions, but imposing them in a very tough way, commendably. Let me ask you that at JINSA, we've proposed a range of ways of broadening the policy, or a range of other policies. I just wanted to raise it with you, and I wanted to get your thoughts about that or other policies that you might be thinking about in ways to pressure the Iranians. For instance, interdicting arms shipments from Iran to Syria and Yemen, where the United States could be more active in that. Giving Israel more tools, given that Israel is on the front lines, giving Israel more tools to confront the Iranians and in a likely future war, such as by front-loading the 10-year MOU, which just kicked in on defense aid. Supporting Syrian Kurdish, either strong autonomy or independence, and offering to protect them. They're our allies with ISIS, and also, but to do that also as a way to prevent the Iranian-backed Assad regime from reclaiming control over the whole thing. And lastly, I would say, pursuing a policy of, to use an old 1950s term, of rollback of the Iranians. These are some ideas that, among others, that we've raised at JINSA, and I was curious if you've considered some of these or others. We'd love to hear other ways that the State Department and the administration might be considering of pressuring the Iranians.
So the sanctions get a lot of the headlines. The policy that President Trump has put in place is much broader than that. I can't go into all the details on each of those. We don't have time for all of that. But there's a lot of work being done on interdiction. You don't see it all. It's not very noisy. Did some of it in my former job. It's a full range of things to do the simple task of convincing the Iranian leaders to behave like a normal nation. You know, I listed 12 things that the Iranians have to do for us to get back in a relationship with them. And when you read through them, they're nothing more than what we ask Belgium to do, right? Like, stop launching rockets into major international airports, for starters. Yeah. It's really, it seemed daunting, but at the end of the day, just be a normal country. But it's not just sanctions. So 5 capitals, right? Beirut, Damascus, Sana'a, Tehran itself, and Baghdad. Those are the pressure points. That's the dream of the Islamic Republic for hegemony. And we are pushing back in each of those capitals, in each of those places, with every tool available to the United States government to achieve that goal, to get the Iranian regime to behave like a normal nation.
Okay. Do you want to address those others? I'll just move on to the next question.
I'll come back to them.
Yeah, sure. Okay, sure. The other suggestions was about how ways we could help Israel further, and also what our policy is about the Syrian Kurds, who've been our allies with against ISIS and so on.
So look, we've worked closely with the Syrian Kurds now for my entire time in service in this administration. They have been great partners. We are now driving to make sure that they have a seat at the table. The political process to our referred, the hardest part, the reason it hasn't made progress is because we've demanded that every element in Syria gets an opportunity to be part of that future government. And in the absence of that, in the absence of their representation, we won't participate in what will be a big check that someone's going to have to write to fix the situation in Syria. And the Syrian Kurds will surely be part of that.
How would you define the administration's overall objective? I use the term rollback, which doesn't, containment was maybe the policy perhaps at times of the previous administration. But how would you define, if you had to think of a couple words, or define the objectives we have towards the Iranians?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. We won't be settled until we have solved each of the files adequately, right? A permanent solution to ensure that Iran never has the capacity to have a nuclear weapon for all time in any form. Second, to push back against this terror regime, which is not only taking place in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon, but in European capitals around the world. It's remarkable, and I hope we can get more support from our European partners of this effort. I'm convinced that we will over time. And then finally, I'll put the other bucket, the broader set of Iranian malign activity. There's much of it, and that's the mission statement. I don't know how to put it into 3 or 4 words, but it's to take each of those 3 spaces and ensure that Iran ceases its current activity, which is so fundamentally detrimental to the world and, frankly, very detrimental to Iran's own people.
Okay. I want to ask you about Turkey. Not really, unless you want to raise it, about what's been in the news in the last few days with the Saudi consulate there. I actually want to ask you a different question about Turkey. There are 2 things. One is, would a sale of our F-35s to Turkey proceed if Turkey takes delivery of Russian S-400s? That was the first one.
So I can't answer that question. I don't want to get out in front of the president on this. But there are a whole series of actions that we're asking Turkey to do. They are a NATO partner. We need them to participate in the enforcement of the norms that NATO has put forward with its mission statement. And we've asked Turkey to do that in every dimension. And we're disappointed in their behavior to date, but we're hopeful that over time they'll begin to do things that make more sense, not only for the Middle East, but for the world. They have the capacity for good. It's a big country that sits at the fulcrum between the Middle East and Europe, and we're applying every element of our diplomatic capacity to convince Turkey that being part of the West is the future for the Turkish people.
The president has made correctly a big issue out of the fact of the American pastor Andrew Bunson being imprisoned for 2 years on patently false charges. His next court hearing is in 2 days.
In about 30 hours, yes.
Yeah. His next court hearing is in 2 days, on October 12th. How would his release affect, do you think, overall U.S.-Turkey relations?
It's an important step. But make no mistake about it, they shouldn't have held him for all of this time. But look, it's a good thing. It's the right thing for them to do. It's the humanitarian thing for Turkey to do. And I'm very hopeful that before too long, Pastor Brunson he and his wife will be able to return to the United States. President Trump has had a focus on it. The administration's had a focus on it. And we're very hopeful that we'll see a good outcome before too long.
Thank you. My last question is about the Palestinian Authority. Now, as Senator Cotton mentioned also about the Taylor Force Act, and this is something that JINSA and our fellow Senator Gerber in particular particularly championed and focused on. However, since the passage of Taylor Force earlier this year, the Palestinian Authority has not really altered its policies or laws in paying terrorists and families. And what do you think this says about the Palestinian Authority? Do you consider an entity that sponsors terror, for instance? What does it say about the prospects for peace and just generally about the U.S. approach to the Palestinians?
Well, I actually signed a memo today with respect to the Taylor Force Act denying $165 million that would have been appropriated to the Palestinian Authority. That number is a rough estimate of the amount of money that was paid out for the various violations that the Taylor Force Act was designed to enforce. But you're right, the behavior has not changed materially. And this administration has taken, much as it did with the embassy, has taken a historic approach. It has said to the Palestinians, we very much want you to have a space. You need to govern. You need to decide you want peace as well. We've said the same thing to the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We've not rolled out our plan for the Middle East peace process yet, but we will before too terribly long. And we are hopeful that there will be parties on all sides that are prepared to engage in a constructive conversation that will lead to that. We are very hopeful that one day the Palestinian people will have the same kinds of things, the same material, the same opportunities that the people of Israel have, right? A real economy, a real governance, all the things that we want for every citizen of the world. And whether it's the Hamas leaders in the Gaza Strip or the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, we've not been able to make that happen yet. But this administration has taken a fundamentally different view of how it is we can ultimately achieve that end objective.
I just want to conclude. I know you've had a little busy travel schedule lately, and I just want to thank you again and the whole administration for everything you've been doing again for U.S. national security and for the U.S.-Israel security relationship. We really appreciate it very much. And
thank you all.
Much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Glad to.
Really an honor of that.
Thank you, Secretary Pompeo. Thank you, Secretary Pompeo, and congratulations on your award. And let's just take a moment to recognize his family and especially his wife, Susan, because without their support, his service would not be possible.